Looks like you're on a journey to unlock a happier and more fulfilling life with this mix of sources on personal growth and spirituality you sent us. So strap in because we're diving deep into some radical concepts from a book called Don't Believe Everything You Think by Joseph Nguyen.
It's a fascinating read.
Get ready to rethink how you think.
Yeah, it's interesting how Nguyen challenges the idea that our happiness depends on our circumstances.
Right?
He says the real culprit behind our suffering is our own thinking.
That is a pretty radical concept. I mean, we're always blaming external things for unhappiness, like a bad job or, a difficult relationship. What if it's all in our heads?
It really is. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? He uses this great analogy of two arrows.
Okay.
The first arrow is like the unavoidable pain we experience in life, things like loss, disappointment, physical discomfort. But then we hit ourselves with a second arrow. And this one is self-inflicted.
So the second arrow is our reaction to the pain, not the pain itself. And you're saying that's where the real suffering comes from.
That's exactly it. It's not the event itself, but our thoughts about it that cause us so much anguish. And to really highlight this point, he presents a scenario in his book where two people have the same job.
Okay.
But one hates it while the other enjoys it. Same job. Completely different experiences, all because of their individual thoughts about the work.
It's like our thoughts create our own reality in a way, at least, when it comes to our emotions.
It is. That's a great way to put it. But then that begs the question, if thinking can be so detrimental to our well-being, why do we do it so much?
Right.
Why do we even evolve to think in the first place?
That's a good question. There has to be an evolutionary purpose, right? Like some survival advantage.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Nguyen explains that our thinking minds were essential for survival in our evolutionary past. Imagine our ancestors constantly scanning their environment for threats. Predators, rival tribes, poisonous plants. This constant vigilance helped keep them alive.
Yeah, that makes sense that in today's world, that same survival mechanism could be working against us.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not dodging saber-toothed tigers anymore, but our minds are still on overdrive, analyzing and worrying about every little thing.
You got it. Our minds haven't quite caught up to our modern, relatively safe lives.
Right.
And this leads us to constantly overthink, creating problems that don't even exist, and experiencing chronic stress and anxiety as a result.
So how do we manage this overthinking? Are you saying we should all just stop thinking altogether?
Not quite.
Is that even possible?
It's not about that. And that's where Nguyen makes an important distinction between thoughts and thinking.
Okay.
He describes thoughts as these neutral downloads from the universe, almost like effortless creative sparks.
Can you give an example of what you mean by that?
Absolutely. So he asks his readers to just picture their dream income.
Okay.
The first number that pops into their head, that's a thought.
Okay.
But then he asks them to multiply that number by 5. Suddenly, all this mental chatter starts flooding in.
Oh, yeah. I can already feel it, like all the doubts and limiting beliefs.
Exactly. That's thinking taking over. The initial thought was pure and even inspiring. It's when we engage with those thoughts, start judging them, analyzing them, that we create suffering.
So it sounds like thoughts themselves aren't the problem, but it's our reaction to them that causes us to struggle.
Oh, got it.
But how do we learn to stop engaging with those negative thoughts? Is it just a matter of willpower?
It's not about silencing your mind completely. That's probably impossible. Instead, Nguyen suggests shifting our relationship with our thoughts. He borrows a framework from spiritual teacher Sydney Banks called the 3 Principles.
3 principles. This sounds intriguing.
It is. The first principle is the concept of the universal mind. This refers to the intelligence behind everything in existence,
Okay.
the source of all creation.
So it's like this ultimate creative force, and we're all connected to it.
That's the idea. The second principle is consciousness, which is our ability to experience this universal intelligence. It's our awareness of ourselves and the world around us.
Okay, so we have this universal mind, and we have our individual consciousness. What's the third piece?
The third principle is thought, and this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Thought is the tool that can either connect us to the universal mind or separate us from it.
So when we're feeling inspired and creative, that means we're in sync with the universal mind. But when we get stuck in our heads, we lose that connection.
That's a great way to understand it. And that disconnection is where a lot of our suffering originates. Nguyen even argues that our natural state when we're not overthinking is actually one of joy, love, and peace.
Hold on, are you saying that we don't have to think our way to happiness? That happiness is actually our default setting?
That's the radical idea that Nguyen proposes. He even challenges readers to think about their happiest memories and ask themselves how much thinking was actually going on in those moments.
That's a good point. When we're truly present in an experience, completely absorbed in the moment, the thinking mind tends to fade away.
Exactly. And in those moments of pure presence, we experience our natural state of joy. It's not about eliminating thinking altogether,
Okay.
but minimizing our engagement with those negative thought patterns.
So how do we do that? Is there some secret meditation technique or mantra we need to learn?
He offers a really beautiful analogy to illustrate how to approach this. Imagine a glass of murky water.
Okay.
If you try to force the dirt to settle, you'll only stir it up more.
Right.
But if you just leave it alone, the water will naturally become clear over time.
So it's about creating space, allowing the thinking mind to calm down on its own.
Exactly. It's about becoming an observer of our thoughts, rather than getting swept away by them.
Mm-hmm.
And here's another key point. Instead of seeing negative emotions as bad, we can learn to reframe them as signals.
Signals, what do you mean by that?
They're indicators that we've gotten caught up in our thinking and disconnected from that universal mind.
Okay.
They're not the enemy. They're simply invitations to become more aware of our thought patterns
Okay.
and make a conscious effort to reconnect.
So instead of resisting negative emotions, we can see them as opportunities to return to our natural state of peace and joy.
That's the shift in perspective that Nguyen encourages. And here's where things get even more interesting. We actually function best when we're not overthinking.
Okay. I can see that applying to things like creative work, but how does that play out in everyday life?
Think about athletes who are in the zone. They're not overthinking their every move, they're just doing.
Right.
Or consider the Japanese concept of mushin, which roughly translates to no mind.
Mushin. It's about acting instinctively without the interference of conscious thought.
Precisely. It's about tapping into a state of flow where action and awareness are seamlessly integrated.
That's really interesting, especially that idea of mushin and how we perform better when we're not overthinking. Seems so counterintuitive, but the more you learn about, like the power of the subconscious, the more it makes sense.
It's fascinating, isn't it? We always associate, success with effort and striving.
Right.
But sometimes the most brilliant solutions come when we step back and allow our minds to just relax. It's like our conscious mind needs a break for that deeper wisdom to surface.
That makes sense. But if we're not supposed to overthink things, how does that apply to setting and achieving our goals? Should we just wait for inspiration to strike?
That's where Nguyen introduces the idea of setting goals from a place of inspiration, not desperation.
Okay.
He suggests that there's a significant difference between the two.
I'm curious about that distinction. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. When we set goals from a place of desperation, we're usually driven by fear, like the need to prove ourselves to others. It's that feeling of, I have to achieve this or else.
Yeah, I get that. It's like we're operating from a sense of scarcity and constantly chasing something external to, validate our worth.
Exactly. And that kind of mindset creates a lot of pressure and anxiety, doesn't it? It's almost like setting ourselves up for disappointment because we're attaching our happiness to those external outcomes.
So if that's the wrong approach, how do we set goals from a place of inspiration?
Nguyen suggests asking ourselves a very thought-provoking question. What would I do if money recognition and external validation were no object?
Wow, that's a powerful question. It cuts through all the noise and forces us to think about what really matters to us deep down.
It's amazing how such a simple question can shift our perspective. When we strip away those external motivators, we're left with a much clearer vision of, what truly excites us, what aligns with our passions and purpose.
It seems like those are the goals we should be pursuing, the ones that feel, expansive and joyful, not driven by fear or lack.
Exactly. And Nguyen ties this concept beautifully to his personal experience with unconditional love. He shares a heartwarming story about his girlfriend. When asked why she loved him, she simply said, I don't know, I just do.
Oh, that's so sweet. I'm sensing a deeper message there, though.
There is. You see, her love wasn't based on any conditions or expectations. It was simply an outpouring of her natural state of love.
So he's drawing a parallel between unconditional love and unconditional creation. It's about doing things purely for the joy of it, not for any external validation or reward. I love that.
It's a beautiful way to think about it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And when we approach our goals and, creative endeavors from that place of pure joy and inspiration, amazing things can happen.
This all makes a lot of sense, but I have to admit I'm also feeling a bit anxious about what it would actually look like to live this way. It seems like such a huge shift from how we're conditioned to approach life.
That's very understandable. This way of being can feel unfamiliar, even a bit scary, especially if, we've been operating from a place of stress, striving for most of our lives.
Right, it's like peace and ease feel suspicious, like we're doing something wrong. Shouldn't we be working harder, striving for more?
Nguyen addresses those anxieties directly in the book. He says that those feelings of unease or resistance are completely normal. The ego, the part of us that's so attached to overthinking, will try to fight back when we start to let go.
So those worried thoughts that pop up, are those just the ego's way of trying to maintain control?
That's one way to look at it. But the more we practice these principles, the quieter those thoughts become. And all that energy we used to spend worrying and overthinking, we can now channel that into pursuing those inspiring goals we talked about earlier.
So instead of spinning our wheels in anxiety, we can use that energy to create something meaningful and fulfilling.
That's the power of aligning our actions with our deepest inspiration. And Nguyen really emphasizes the importance of cultivating faith and trust in the universe throughout this process.
So it's not just about letting go of thinking, but also about having faith that something bigger than ourselves is guiding us.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's about surrendering to the flow of life, knowing that even when we can't see the whole path ahead of us, we're being supported every step of the way.
And he uses a really insightful Zen story to illustrate this point, the one about the cup overflowing with tea.
Oh yes. The scholar who thinks he knows everything can't receive any more wisdom because his cup is already full.
It's a reminder that our preconceived notions can block us from new possibilities. We have to be willing to empty our cups, so to speak, to make room for the universe to work its magic.
That's such a perfect analogy. And this brings us to one of the most intriguing aspects of Nguyen's book, the concept of creating space for miracles.
I love the sound of that. How do we actually do that?
Well, he provides some compelling examples, like Thomas Edison, who famously used naps to solve problems. He would fall asleep in his chair, holding steel balls in his hand. When he drifted off to sleep, the balls would drop, waking him up with a fresh insight.
Wow, it's fascinating how he intentionally created a space for his subconscious mind to work on the problem.
Pretty brilliant, isn't it? And Einstein, too, he understood the power of stepping away from a problem. He would often play his violin when he got stuck, and the solution would often come to him mid-song.
It seems like a recurring theme among creative geniuses. Understanding that our best ideas often come when we're not actively trying to force them.
That's the paradox. Nguyen actually outlines a simple 3-step process for creating space for miracles in our own lives.
I love a good process. What are the steps?
Step 1 is becoming aware that your thinking is the root cause of your negative emotions.
Okay, so first we acknowledge that we're stuck in a thought loop.
Exactly. Step 2 is to create space by surrendering any manual thinking from the personal mind and having complete faith that your inner wisdom will provide the answer.
Okay, so we let go of the need to control, to figure everything out on our own, and trust that the universe, or our higher selves, or whatever you want to call it, has our back.
That's the essence of it.
All right.
And step 3 is to become aware of any feelings that arise as you surrender and magnify those feelings of love, peace, and joy.
Okay, so we lean into those positive emotions, knowing they're a sign we're on the right track. It's like we're training ourselves to trust a new way of being.
You got it. But of course, as with any new way of being, there can be obstacles along the way.
I can imagine. It's not always easy to put these principles into practice. What are some of the challenges people might encounter?
Well, one common challenge is the fear of becoming lazy or unproductive. We're so conditioned to believe that, happiness and ease are the enemies of success.
Oh, absolutely. It's almost like we're afraid to let go of the hustle because we think it's the only way to achieve anything worthwhile.
But Nguyen reminds us that we can actually be more productive when we're not stressed and overthinking.
Yeah, it's like when we're relaxed and in a state of flow, work doesn't even feel like work anymore.
Exactly. Another obstacle many people face is the fear of the unknown. Letting go of control can be scary, especially if we're not used to trusting the universe.
Yeah, what if it doesn't work out?
Right. Nguyen's advice is to embrace that uncertainty. He says that growth and transformation often happen outside of our comfort zones.
So it's about trusting the process even when it feels a little uncomfortable.
Exactly. And for those who struggle with lack of faith or trust, Nguyen offers some concrete tips in his book.
I always love the actionable advice. What are some of his suggestions?
One of his tips is to create what he calls a non-thinking environment.
So it's about consciously designing our surroundings to support peace and clarity. What else?
He also emphasizes the importance of developing a morning routine that sets you up for success.
Makes sense. Starting the day with intention can really influence our thoughts and actions throughout the day.
Absolutely. And finally, he suggests strategically shifting your work tasks to align with what brings you joy and energy.
That's a great idea. It's about finding ways to incorporate more of those activities that light us up into our workday.
Exactly. It's all about working smarter, not harder.
This idea of creating a non-thinking environment and shifting our work towards what we enjoy really resonates with me, but I'm still kind of wrestling with something. If our natural state is happiness, why aren't we all, just walking around in a state of bliss all the time? What gets in the way?
It's not that we lose our natural state of joy. It's more like we cover it up with layers and layers of thinking.
Okay.
Like the sun that's always shining, even when it's hidden behind the clouds.
So you're saying that peace and joy are always available to us. We just have to learn how to, access those states more easily. It's not about reaching some permanent state of enlightenment or something like that.
Exactly. The more we practice non-thinking, the easier it becomes to tap into that, wellspring of joy within us. It's like strengthening a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
That's empowering. It's like we have this incredible potential for happiness right inside us. We just need to learn how to unlock it.
That's the beauty of what Nguyen is sharing. And he goes beyond just the theory. He provides, practical tools and techniques that we can use to actually integrate these principles into our daily lives.
That's what I appreciate about this deep dive. It's not just about acquiring knowledge, but about applying that knowledge to create real change.
Absolutely. Speaking of change, Nguyen's very upfront about the fact that shifting to a non-thinking way of being can sometimes bring up unexpected challenges.
Okay.
For example, some people actually experience anxiety when they start feeling more peace and joy.
Now, that's counterintuitive. Why would feeling good cause anxiety?
Well, it's because most of us are so used to operating from a place of stress and striving that peace and ease can feel really unfamiliar, even a little bit wrong. Like our minds are constantly asking, shouldn't I be worrying about something?
Yeah, it's like we become addicted to the drama of our own thinking.
That's a great way to put it. And that's why it's so important to develop trust in this process, to have faith that everything is unfolding as it should, even when it feels a little unsettling.
So we need to learn to embrace the unknown, even when it feels a bit scary. Trusting that, this new way of being will lead to greater happiness and fulfillment in the long run.
Exactly. That's the courage Nguyen invites us to cultivate. The courage to let go of our need to control, to surrender to the wisdom of the universe and our own inner guidance.
This has been such an interesting exploration. So for our listeners, the key takeaway here is that thinking itself isn't the enemy. It's being ruled by our thoughts that causes so much unnecessary suffering.
Beautifully said. And by understanding the nature of our thinking minds and learning to create space for non-thinking, we can unlock a life filled with more peace, joy, and fulfillment.
Absolutely. And we highly recommend checking out Joseph Nguyen's book, Don't Believe Everything You Think, to dive even deeper into these powerful concepts. But before we wrap up, we want to leave you with one final thought-provoking question from the book. If I had infinite money, already traveled the world, had no fear, and didn't receive any recognition for what I do, what would I do, or what would I create? Let that question sit with you and see what insights arise. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Loved this video? Smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. And don't forget to order the book, link below.